Okay. Can everybody hear me? Can
Yes,
all of you hear me?
They're all muted.
Oh, they're
yes,
okay.
yes.
Right, right. They're all. Yeah, I know. They're all muted.
Right.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Howard Weiss. As you all know, I'm the associate dean of the School of Architecture and Planning and a professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning. And it's not a department anymore; it's a program in City and Regional Planning. I've known Howard for close to 27 years. Like he came off a year after I arrived. So don't date us though with that dates. Like we're not
26 years to be exact.
26. We're not. Yeah, we are not that old. So let's don't date us. But anyway, let me. It has been a pleasure knowing him and what you call. I'm so proud of him that he makes us proud. Let's put it this way. But without further ado, let me introduce him. He has about 20 years of urban planning and real estate development experience and managed over 900 million real estate public facilities project. Currently, he's the COO for a local transportation agency with more than 1,000 employees, with nearly 660 employees under his authority. He is responsible for maintenance of the infrastructure in the nation's capital. Previously, he served as an associate professor and program director of the MS in real estate development at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. Prior to that, he served as the executive director of the Redevelopment Authority of Prince George's County, Maryland, the principal development agency of a metropolitan county of 900,000 residents, with a specific focus on mixed income, public-private partnership, development projects totaling more than 774 million, which will produce nearly 2,500 mixed income housing units and 100,000 square feet of retail, resulting in nearly 6 million in new property tax revenue and 1,900 new jobs. During his first 10 years in the District of Columbia government, Howard worked on various policy initiatives, including housing policy, helping to rewrite the city's condemnation law, targeted public investment, and workforce development. He completed the city's first green collar job demand analysis. He led Home Again initiative to acquire vacant and abandoned property and response and repurpose it for mixed income housing. He also led the planning effort on the reuse of excess school facility space and managed the vacant property acquisition and disposition process. He also served as the Director of Planning and Sustainability for the University of District of Columbia, where he completed the university's first strategic sustainability plan. Howard attended the John F. Kennedy School of Government Senior State and Local Government Officials Program in 2006. He has extensive higher education experience, including as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University in the Masters of Professional Studies in Real Estate program. He served as an adjunct professor in the School of Architecture at Catholic University and the Regional Planning program over here. So, in regional planning program, okay. He was also instructed at Howard's University School of Architecture. Additionally, he has extensive international experience serving as a Washington, D.C. representative for German Marshall Fund's Transatlantic Cities Network, a collaboration of 20 American and European public policy practitioners, and is a frequent speaker at professional conferences. He is a past member of Urban Land Institute and the International Council of Shopping Centers, the American Institute of Certified Planners, and the American Planning Association, and is currently a member of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. So I think I've said enough about Howard. So without further ado, Howard, we can go ahead with your presentation. And like I said, it's always a pleasure to see you and good to have you speak.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Sen. I see a lot of familiar faces and names on my screen. So I appreciate everyone who's taken time out to listen to this presentation. Really, I hope for it to be more of a discussion than a presentation. I'll go through some ideas and thoughts that I have based a lot on, where I've stood before in my career as an urban planner, as a real estate developer, as a government official to help facilitate public-private partnerships. It's within that context that I'm going to share these thoughts and ideas with you, really on how the city of Baltimore can transform itself to be a model city for the 21st century. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential in the city of Baltimore. It's where I went to graduate school. It's where I first got involved in urban planning in a professional way, and real estate development. So for a lot of reasons, Baltimore is always near and dear to my heart. So without further ado, what I like to do is share my screen and um, go through the presentation, and we'll have some time at the end to uh, have some Q&A. All righty. So this presentation is titled Reviving the Declining City, Strategic Investments for Baltimore Neighborhoods. And, Baltimore was one of our great industrial cities. And, for the last 70 years, it's been in pretty much a constant state of decline. If you look at many of the economic indicators that folks find important, jobs, unemployment, population, median income, you'll see that there's a terrible pattern of decline in Baltimore, basically not keeping pace with its neighboring cities to the north, like Philadelphia, and neighboring cities to the south, like the District of Columbia. And so this presentation, is really designed for an audience of urban planners and real estate development, community development practitioners. And I also want to, put out there a challenge to my alma mater, Morgan State, for it to take a leadership role in helping to reverse the 70 years of decline that Baltimore has been experiencing. And I like to start with this vision statement, and really, because of the magnitude of the problem in Baltimore, I think it's more than enough time for Baltimore to take on really progressive, innovative public policies to help improve the quality of life for its residents, for its businesses, and for those who visit the city. And I think that vision needs to be bold, it needs to be innovative, and it needs to be courageous. And you can't do that by being stuck in your old ways of approaching problems. So hopefully this statement inspires people to think about how they can address these challenges, or the way they should address these challenges. And for some reason, my slides are not advancing. Okay. So, we are in a new millennium. In the 21st century, we're seeing that, what people are clearly and finally acknowledging that there are historic patterns of growth rooted in segregation and poverty that affect the way Baltimore performs today. There is a geospatial mismatch in terms of people and jobs and opportunity and wealth that has existed for a number of decades in Baltimore that are only further exacerbated by the current conditions in the city. And Baltimore is, Baltimore exists within the context of a metropolitan region, and the development trends in the region are such that sprawl still is the prevailing method of development and settlement patterns. And as a result of sprawl, jobs, population, businesses tend to be more dispersed, and that's putting Baltimore at a continuous competitive disadvantage. And then we have public policies such as green building, sustainable development, environmental policies, policies around social equity. These policies are helping to change the game and raise the public's expectation of not only the standards of decorum that we operate in, but also the standards of performance that we expect our businesses and our local governments to perform. Just go through the numbers of Baltimore. You know, it's a city of less than 600,000 people. What's interesting, at its peak, Baltimore had a population of about 950,000. So it's the infrastructure in Baltimore is based upon accommodating that number of people, and you know the city is at a point where it's rapidly approaching Detroit and Cleveland in terms of, you know, industrial cities that have had the most decline in population. About 298,000 jobs, 12,000 businesses. Just to give you some context, Prince George's County, where I used to work, had roughly 14,000 businesses for a population of about 900,000. Montgomery County, Maryland, has a business community of about 28,000 businesses. Granted, Baltimore is has a much smaller physical footprint, smaller population, but on a relationship level, there's a need to create more opportunities for businesses to thrive. Median household income, 48,000. Comparing it to Washington, D.C., it's, you know, Washington, D.C.'s median income is nearly double that of Baltimore. Baltimore has one of the highest poverty rates of any major city. I think only Philadelphia has a higher poverty rate. And like Philadelphia, the poverty rate in Baltimore has pretty much been fixed around the 20% mark for the last 20 years. There's been very little movement in bringing that number down, even as the population has decreased. Commuting time of 31 minutes, that's pretty standard for sort of the Mid-Atlantic corridor. In Washington, D.C. area, depending on where you live, it fluctuates between 30 and 45 minutes. So this is not unusual. The obesity rate, however, in Baltimore is extremely high, one of the highest in the nation. Roughly 36% of the population is obese. This starts to speak to lifestyle choices in terms of what people consume, how people exercise, when they exercise, how frequently they exercise, and also where they choose to work. The median value of a single family home, 156,000. This, in my opinion, is an encouraging number for a couple of reasons. One, it means that the dream of home ownership is not out of the reach for many individuals. When you compare this to, say, Washington, D.C., whose median single family home value it currently, I think, exceeds $500,000, it starts to paint a picture of Baltimore being a place that one could settle down, purchase a home at a moderate cost, and hopefully lead a high quality of life. Incidence of diabetes is fairly high, 12% for the population. The bachelor's degree attainment compared to Washington, D.C., this is low. This is sort of right in the sweet spot for many cities, however, but for the region, this is a low number. The home ownership rate is lower than to be expected, again, given the median value of single family homes and the availability of homes. The home ownership rate is much lower than what it should be. And the median gross rent, again, speaks to affordability. A typical apartment in Baltimore rents for $1,000 versus comparing it to Washington, D.C., where the typical apartment rents for more than twice that amount. So Baltimore needs to change. The question is, how do we do that? What should we be putting in place today, in the city of Baltimore? How should, leaders be looking at ways to influence people to make decisions to help improve, the quality of life and conditions for the residents, business owners, and the like? And, the great urban philosopher, Mike Dicker, once famously said, the only constant in life is change, so be prepared to change. And I think it's time for Baltimore to, heed that sound advice. And so my proposition is that there's essentially two paths that Baltimore needs to follow in order to make itself a model for 21st century urban living. And the first of those solutions is promoting walkability. And the reason that I believe walkability is important is one, it is it's one of the things that binds us together as humans. It's what really separates us from other animals in the animal kingdom, and ultimately it produces better social, health, environmental, and economic outcomes. And the second path is gentrification, and gentrification in its purest sense is really American style capitalism. And that American style capitalism is that, if you can develop a product or service that allows you to generate more revenues than the cost of production, you should be successful. And when you look at gentrification in the context of neighborhood transformation, most of the effects of gentrification are positive and are things that people really want and advocate for, with the exception of one element, which we'll talk about in a little while. But gentrification, in my humble opinion, needs to be promoted and accelerated in Baltimore, because the alternative is, we've seen the alternative, which is 70 years of decline. We haven't seen 70 years of gentrification. We've seen 70 years of decline and the impact it's had in Baltimore. So what exactly is walkable development? So I think there's 4 characteristics I want to talk about quickly. The first of those is that walkable development is predicated on higher densities than what we typically see in many parts of the city and in fact the region. So that means that we will be developing the built environment in a much more compact fashion that allows us to put more residential units, more developable square footage on a given piece of property. The second part about walkable development is that it's predicated on the idea of mixed use real estate. So you can have a mixture of uses within the building, or you can have a mixture of uses that are adjacent to one another. So you can have horizontal or vertical mixture of uses. And it's that mixture of uses that encourages walkability because of their convenience. Instead of having to drive all over the countryside to get to what you need to get to and perform the things you need to perform, having things that are in a geographically compact arrangement that has multiple of uses encourages walkability, multiple reasons to walk. The third element of walkable development is new product types, such as this missing middle housing. Oftentimes when you look at zoning codes, there seems to be a propensity to encourage development at the extreme outer edges, which is single family detached dwellings, and then fairly large, robust multifamily dwellings. And the zoning codes in many cities has eliminated or made it difficult to build this middle type of housing. And you see some examples of what that housing typologies could be on this slide. And then lastly, with the advent of mobile technology, you're seeing more and more applications of multimodal transportation amenities. So 20 years ago, people couldn't dream of a future where you would have food delivery on demand, pick up and drop off zones where people can drive in, pick up meals, products, services, or whatever, and not have to and not struggle to find dedicated on-street parking. You see the advent of scooters, bike share programs have expanded, vehicles for hire. All of these technological advancements allow for hyper local, hyper individualized transportation solutions. Many of those solutions are important to sort of augment and fill in the gaps that are, often described as, the last mile challenge versus, when you have these, large big ticket transportation systems, light rail, streetcar, getting people to that final destination from those modal stops often presents a challenge. These new technological advancements allow for that last mile challenge to be bridged. This slide comes from Chris Lineberger. He's a real estate developer and a scholar, teacher, researcher, and lecturer. And he's been championing this idea of walkable development, upwards of 20 plus years. And, he's developed this matrix of, 4 types of walkable development. And the two that I focused on in my presentation are the walkable urban, most specifically looking at walkable neighborhood. So there are regionally significant walkable places. You'll see them as downtowns of major cities, or places like Tyson's Corner or Owings Mills, where they are, there's a large retail component, a large amount of office space, job and employment component. And these are significant places of great size and magnitude. But then you have these sort of local neighborhood scale communities where walkability is important. When I lived in Baltimore, the last place I lived in Baltimore was the community of Lake Walker, which is right above Belvedere Square, and it was a great location because I could walk to the Belvedere Square marketplace. I could even walk out into the suburbs and go to the we used to call it the Gourmet Giant that was out there. But there are a lot of amenities within a 15-minute walk. It wasn't a regional destination. It wasn't a regional employment center, but it provided, all of the amenities I needed for a comfortable quality of life. All those things most of those things were within a 15 to 20-minute walk from where I live. And so those are the kinds of places that, in my opinion, Baltimore needs to focus on over the next, 10 to 20 years to really reposition the city as a 21st century model. And so some of the outputs of these walk-up communities, for those regionally significant walk-ups, especially, what you see is a hyper efficiency in terms of the ability of these relatively small, geographically oriented places delivering huge economic output. And what Mr. Lineberger has found in his research, looking at the 30 largest 30 largest cities and metropolitan regions in the country, is that these regional walk-ups really only cover about 1 to 2% of the land area, but they deliver 50% of the economic output. So, this is the classic example of getting the most bang for your buck. 1% of the region's area is producing 50% of the output. And what we found is that, especially in the regionally significant walk-up areas, the majority of new commercial, office, multifamily occurs in these walk-up areas. In Washington, D.C., there was a study that was put out by the regional transportation entity, and they say that in Washington, D.C. area, more than 50% of all of the commercial office development is occurring within a quarter mile of a metro station. And and so basically you're seeing throughout the region, if you're not connected to transit, you're seeing that your rental rates are going down, your vacancy rates are going up, and people are just not interested in occupying these office buildings sort of floating out in the hinterland in these suburban style office parks. People want to be connected to one another. It's why the WeWorks phenomena seems to work especially well in cities because of the density and proximity that people have to one another. And it's all, to me, it's all still rooted upon this idea of walkability, that, once you get to your destination, you can walk to pretty much anywhere else you need to get to over the course of the day. And as I mentioned before, you're seeing higher rental rates. You're also seeing faster absorption rates, higher retail sales, higher employment, higher educational attainment, and higher property values, all in these walk-up areas, and they all exceed what the regional averages are. So, at the end of the day, these walk-up areas ultimately are the economic engines of a city and of a region. And as such, I think they should be expanded upon so that more areas within a city and more areas within a region have an opportunity to be the types of economic engines that make communities vibrant. And I mentioned this before, walk-ups produce better health outcomes. You see lower rates of diabetes, obesity, stress, heart disease. All of these things, all of these sort of these negative outputs are reversed in communities where people have the ability to walk more on a daily basis. And so looking at Mr. Lineberger's study from a few years back, he ranked the 30 largest metropolitan regions, and you see Baltimore is sort of firmly rooted in the middle. It's ranked number 19th in the country. And if you see here, it's he defined 15 walk-up areas of consequence in Baltimore and in the surrounding suburban region. And in my opinion, that number needs to probably at least double, if not more, if Baltimore and the surrounding suburbs want to move up higher in this ranking. You'll see some cities that you think are obvious choices in terms of their walkability: New York City, Chicago, San Francisco. They're always at the top. But you also see that Baltimore has been usurped by other cities that you wouldn't necessarily think of them as walkable places. Charlotte, Atlanta, these are communities, Denver, that don't have the same rich industrial, dense development patterns that people seem to think of when they talk about walkable cities. But those cities nonetheless are performing much better than even Baltimore. So just identifying a few barriers to walkable development in Baltimore. I mentioned before the history of redlining and exclusionary racial zoning. Baltimore was the first major city, I think they were second to Richmond, to institute racially exclusionary zoning ordinances. And as a result, the city evolved with very clear, distinct, segregated patterns of home ownership, of business ownership as a result of that. And that legacy is still impacting the way Baltimore performs today. I mentioned earlier the huge population loss that has affected the city. And the city is still hemorrhaging population, unlike many cities, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York City, that have seen consistent increases in population over the last decade. Baltimore still falling behind. And Baltimore, like Philadelphia, shares this common phenomenon of high number of vacant and dilapidated properties. The impact of blight in Baltimore is is exacerbating the challenges that the city faces. Nothing repels investment. Nothing speeds up population loss better, and nothing speaks to the social pathologies of an area more so than the number of vacant, dilapidated properties. Perceptions of crime and poor performing schools are also barriers to um, um, promoting more walkable development, although I think um, these two factors are more easily overcome than some of the others. And lastly, I think there's been sort of a plateau in terms of public policies that are really aggressively promoting a car-free living and car-free living lifestyle throughout the entire city. There are parts of Baltimore that, Mount Vernon, Canton, et cetera, that you can live, relatively conveniently in the car-free lifestyle, but there's other areas where that would be much more challenging. And I think that's something that the city needs to consider as it moves forward. And then lastly, there's been a lot of responses to COVID that ultimately have gone a long way to promote more walkable communities. One of the phenomena that we see, throughout many cities is this idea of slow streets, blocking streets to vehicular traffic. In Washington, D.C., we call these streeteries, where we've actually set up places for outdoor dining in the vehicular right-of-way to, one, expand the sidewalk to allow for more social distancing to occur, but two, to, help slow and reduce the traffic volumes in communities and make them more attractive for, leisurely walking. Second element I wanted to talk to you about is gentrification. And as I said before, gentrification is in many ways just American style capitalism played out at an extreme level. It's a neighborhood change philosophy that's based on, income, investment, and also societal values. And one of the things about gentrification, especially recently, it's taken on, in many places, it takes on a racial dynamic and a racial element that some folks have attributed to white privilege. And I use this example of Christopher Columbus discovering the Bahamas, a place where, there already was people and a culture, but yet Columbus arrived and now the place has been, quote unquote, discovered. And in many communities, folks feel that, when gentrification occurs, there's this Columbus phenomena that all of a sudden now community has been discovered and it becomes, a desirable place to be because others have come in and, helped to change the perception of a place. But also gentrification, as I said, it's an economic process that's rooted in change. And oftentimes people's reaction to change is almost instinctively negative. If it's not outright negative, at the very least, it usually comes with a level of uncomfortableness that needs to be addressed. It's a complex process. These are some examples of, elements of gentrification. You see housing prices go up. You see housing values go up. You see better retail choices come in. You see the improvement in housing stock. These are all things that people generally want to see in their neighborhoods. When I was working in East Baltimore, one of the questions I would always ask people in community forums was, do you want your property to be more valuable or less valuable 10 years from now? And the answer was always, well, yes. And it's like, okay, well, do you want to be able to provide some intergenerational wealth to your children and your children's children? And the answer is always yes. And I said, well, okay, well, that's desirable, but that's also harder to do. In order to get there, there's going to have to be some changes because the current trajectory is not going to get you where you need to go. And one of the byproducts too often with gentrification is that there's a displacement and replacement of much of the population, um, but also displacement of community anchors or community institutions as well. And it's that aspect of gentrification that I think gives gentrification its bad name. And I think the focus needs to be on how do you minimize the impact, the displacement impact, while promoting the other attributes of gentrification. And so these are some of the effects. I mentioned the cultural institutions and traditions. You see, this is a slide from one of the best soul food takeout restaurants in Washington, D.C. that recently closed up because the property owner got an exorbitant amount of money for this little teeny tiny piece of property. And so this institution had been there for, a number of decades, is replaced with something, oftentimes it's new, doesn't have the same cultural sensibilities or sensitivity that that the old institution have. And as a result, people see the loss of iconic destinations as the neighborhood changing, and it's not changing for them, it's changing for someone else. Many places, I've seen this play out in Washington, D.C. a number of times. When bike lanes come in, people are like, oh, we're getting gentrified. The bike lanes are the new Starbucks. When I started doing real estate development, it was, if you saw Starbucks coming, it was time to think about getting out of the neighborhood because it's about to change. And in many ways, bike lanes still reflect that. Dog parks are another, sort of element that identifies a neighborhood is changing. But one of the things, that's more subtle is that you're going to see the expansion of the 5G small cell implementation, so that the Wi-Fi coverage will improve. And when you look at where places like Verizon and other cell phone carriers are looking to invest, they're not looking to invest in the low to moderate income communities first. And unless there's some specific policies that require them to do so, those neighborhoods will be the last to achieve this technological advancement. Some more indicators of gentrification, the number of vacant buildings is reduced because people, acquire them, rehab them, put them in state of good repair. The pace of home sales increases. You'll see people, at when gentrification is at its peak, you'll see people buying homes with escalation clauses in them, so that people pay way over the asking price for property just to get into the neighborhood. And then you'll see these stereotypical hipster pastimes. You'll see, art themed activities, dog walks, dog parks, and folksy restaurants that cater to a certain population. So the new urban challenge is, how do you make these economic benefits that come with gentrification accrue mostly to the residents and businesses that are most directly impacted? And then I think the second challenge, and this is really germane to Baltimore because of its majority African-American population, what specifically is the role for middle-class African-Americans in this process of neighborhood change, of promoting gentrification? What's the role that this part of the community needs to play? Because when you look at the demographic trends, most of the population loss that's occurring is because African Americans are moving out of cities now. So, the Black flight trends are real, and that needs to be addressed. We also need to, and this is especially prevalent in Baltimore, look at the enduring effects of redlining. You see the map to the left. You'll see the areas in red that were highlighted by the federal government as being places that they would not invest in. They would not provide mortgage insurance for folks to buy property in those areas. So the real effect of redlining needs to be addressed, because the much of the poverty and neighborhood decline that we have today can be attributed back to the 1930s, when redlining started as official government policy. And gentrification ultimately is about wealth creation. So by focusing on anti-poverty strategies and anti-displacement strategies, you create hopefully an environment by which residents and businesses that are in these areas that are primed for reinvestment, that those folks will be able to take advantage of and thrive in that environment. So I just want to close with 10 things specifically for Baltimore City to consider as we move forward with the recent election of a new mayor. There's always an opportunity to hit the restart button. And so if I had an opportunity to have an audience with the new mayor, these would be 10 things that I would suggest to him to consider. One is target your tax abatement programs so that they're not generic or citywide, but target them specifically to the areas that are most in decline. Baltimore has a property tax abatement program for infill development that needs to double to a 10-year tax abatement. In Philadelphia, the 10-year tax abatement was recently renewed. There was a lot of debate about whether it should be continued, but ultimately people acknowledged the positive impact it had with attracting development in many declining parts of the city because of the 10-year freeze on taxes for infill development. Most of Baltimore's home buying incentives are fixated on folks who are considered low to moderate families of 80% or less median income. I would counter that there needs to be an equal, if not more, focus on the moderate and middle income buyers, folks between 80 and 120% of median income. Funding for that will probably have to come from local sources and not federal or state sources, as those are needs tested. But I would strongly encourage the city to think about how they can help attract those middle income buyers back into the city. City has a housing trust fund. It's woefully underfunded. At the very least, the trust fund needs to be doubled. You see what those numbers would be in FY 21, 22, and 23 if they took my suggestion. And then something that is often overlooked, it's important to have a large cadre of locally based developers involved in the gentrification neighborhood improvement process. And so programs that promote sort of your do-it-yourself rehabilitation, like in Baltimore, there's one called Charm City Builders. In Philadelphia, when I was at Jefferson, we worked with a program called Jumpstart Germantown. It basically teaches people how to become small-scale real estate investors, mostly with the idea of people buying homes, rehabbing them, and then renting them out. But at a small scale, couple units a year, 4 to 5 units a year. I think there needs to be an appreciable effort in promoting that within the city. There needs to be an acceleration of vacant and abandoned properties. Assemble those properties to create larger development parcels so you can promote more robust development, mixed use projects that offer all of the expected amenities that people the amenities that people have come to expect in 21st century housing. I think I talked about this earlier, but the middle markets, again, working in communities that are on the fringe, that are not so much in complete decline that it requires an exorbitant amount of federal and local resources to help bring the neighborhood back, but sort of work on those neighborhoods that might be considered fringe or on the cusp of transitioning. Start there. You might be able to get a greater bang for your investment buck. Code enforcement needs to be improved, needs to be streamlined. There needs to be more teeth, consequences for folks who fail to comply with the code, especially as it relates to vacant buildings. The city has a program called Vacants to Value, whereby they offer small scale properties to individual homeowners or small scale developers. I would suggest making an effort to make this even more robust by tying specific funding streams or mechanisms to Vacants to Value, as well as making it a requirement that people demonstrate some level of sophistication, either through track record of accomplishments, but maybe being connected back to the idea of the do-it-yourself real estate rehab training programs. And then lastly, promoting local entrepreneurship so that the business ventures and opportunities that arise as a result of gentrification and promoting walkable development, that you have real folks, local folks who are poised and in a position to take advantage and benefit from those opportunities. And then I'll just close on this as an alum of Morgan State University, the identified urban university for the state of Maryland. I firmly believe that Morgan needs to be in the forefront of this conversation. I know Dr. Wilson would like the university to advance from an R2 research university to an R1 research-based university. Currently, there are no HBCUs in the country that have R1 status. And I see no reason why Morgan shouldn't be the first. Just like I see no reason for Morgan not to establish a community-based real estate development program that focuses on these issues of gentrification and walkability and neighborhood change. I think it is a nice complement to the other three disciplines of landscape architecture, urban planning, and architecture that are currently offered at the master's level at Morgan State University. And I see real estate development practitioners as being, sort of the fourth leg of the stool for built environment practitioners. And I think Morgan is in a position to be a leader in this area by, educating the next generation of developers to, address these issues of, economic and social disparities, of abandonment and investment, but also to promote a sustainable, healthy, and dare I say, walkable quality lifestyle for all of the residents of Baltimore City. And so with that, I'll end, and I'll open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Howard. Does anyone out there have some questions? I see there's already some active comments in the comment field, but you can, I believe you can raise your hand using that feature, and you can actually say the question after we've called on you. Okay, Rick, go ahead. You can turn on your mic and let it fly.
Hi, thanks, Howard. Really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, Rick.
A question about how to go forward. you talked about tax abatements, and people may oppose them because they seem to deprive the city of revenue that it needs. I'm wondering what your thinking is about, instead of a tax abatement, a tax shift. And that would involve lower taxes on privately created building values combined with higher taxes on publicly created land values. There have been a number of jurisdictions in Pennsylvania that have used this approach. And without spending any new money or losing any revenue, this shift makes it cheaper for people to construct, improve, and maintain buildings, which is, of course, something we need and want to do. And the higher tax on land values actually helps keep land prices low and encourages infill development, makes it more expensive for people to hold on to vacant buildings or surface parking lots or vacant land. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the tax shift in lieu of a tax abatement.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I know that's an issue that's near and dear to your heart, and I've learned a lot about split rate taxation from you, Rick. And I would say that absolutely, if the state of Maryland allows for that, I'm not as familiar with their tax laws, but if it allows for jurisdictions to do that, by all means, Baltimore should do that.
Well, let me just chime in about the state of the law. I've looked into it a little bit. And Maryland allows counties to tax land and buildings at different values, but they don't allow cities to do that. I'm sorry, I got that reversed. They allow cities to do it, but they don't allow counties. And the property tax in Baltimore is administered by Baltimore County, not the city. So I think what would make sense would be legislation at the state level that simply gives counties the same ability to be flexible with their property tax rate setting as cities are.
Excellent point.
Do we have some other questions? I see Samia Kirshner, you want to, I see your very long question, but you want to turn on your mic and ask a part of it with some sense that there's a time limit. So maybe a part of your comments last question as I see you come back to the group here.
Sure. I actually have 4 questions. Thank you, first of all.
Samia, get a little closer to your mic.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
No, I get
a little bit better.
A little bit better, a little bit closer.
Okay. Well, I have it right next to my. Is that better? Is this better?
Only slightly.
Can you hear me now?
All right. Maybe Howard, if you could just, why don't we use your comments? Samia, thanks for putting all that stuff in the chat. Howard, do you want to react to some of this?
Yeah, I'm not sure if everyone else can see the chat, but one of the comments, well, the first one is street appropriation by restaurants another form of privatizing the public realm? And the answer to that, I would say, is yes. I mean, we obviously allow for street cafes. We allow, and when I say we, I'm thinking specifically my experience right now in Washington, D.C. You know, we allow stores to place their products on the street for purchase. I mean, on the sidewalk for purchase. We also allow them to have cafes, flea markets. All those can occur within the public realm. So yes, it is another form of, I would say, a limited privatization of the public realm. As a COVID response, we deem this to be something that is temporary, as long as the effective mayor's order is in place that allows for these options to be implemented. Are there alternative models to American style capitalism, or should we continue to support, engage in the form of economic that seems to give rise to issues of inequities in real estate development? You know, I love American capitalism. So I haven't lived anywhere else other than the United States for any length of time, so I really don't have another frame of reference. But I enjoy the fact that, you know, people through innovation and hard work can create a product and service, and really the sky's the limit as to what they're able to achieve. So if there's a better system at promoting that, I would definitely be willing to look at that. But from my perspective and my experience, and again, I haven't had the benefit of living in another country. Um, I see American capitalism as a fantastic experiment, and one that, you know, constantly needs to be tweaked and improved upon. But I think it has the ability to evolve and has the ability to help solve some of the problems that, you know, sometimes it creates, but also has the ability to solve those problems as well. Are tax abatements enough without local hiring requirements? You know, the local hiring requirements, that could be in addition to the tax abatement. Many of these hiring requirements, these social preference programs that look at requiring, you know, a certain number of residents being hired for new positions that are created through the economic activity. That's pretty standard form, you know, across the country. I've worked with those programs in Baltimore and in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C. So that's not unusual as a complement to the tax abatement. You know, essentially it's one of the strings that are attached to receiving the benefit of the tax abatement. Since Morgan has the only architecture, landscape architecture, planning, construction management, interior design programs, what do you think should happen at the School of Architecture and Planning? I think it needs to be on the forefront of these issues. From, you know, from the academic / practitioner perspective, in educating the next group of you know, uh, development professionals, real estate development professionals. But I also think with Dr. Wilson's charge to be a research institution, I think there are some issues around gentrification and the impact of gentrification and public health. I think there's a synergy there that would warrant, especially given the pandemic that we're in right now. I think there's some synergies there that could warrant some significant research opportunities as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we've I think we have time for, I think we can stay on the call for just a little bit longer if you have a question. There was a question, Howard, about opportunity zones, and maybe you could comment, I don't know if you saw that comment, maybe you could comment on how they might work in Baltimore and beyond what's already happened, and maybe you can explain a little bit how they work to the students who don't know them or who aren't familiar.
Yeah, so the opportunity zones, as I've come to understand them, obviously it was an attempt by the current president to, you know, create a program to attract capital in underperforming neighborhoods, mostly in cities, but also regions. My understanding of the way the program works is that the capital that is invested essentially is, you know, what we would consider in real estate parlance, the last capital in. So, you know, these are projects that have to, you know, be at a state where they're nearly shovel ready in terms of implementation. They still would have to pass the if not but for tests, meaning that, you know, without these resources, they wouldn't be able to come to fruition. But my suspicion is that, you know, the program seemed to be harried in its development. I don't think it was necessarily thought all the way through. I think it's going to be woefully inadequate in really attracting substantial investment in these underserved communities. It'll pale in comparison to the impact of, say, empowerment zones or enterprise communities or the low-income housing tax credit or even new markets tax credit, because I don't think it creates enough of a benefit and requires the investor to be, I guess, involved or included in the deal for an extended period of time. And as a result, I think they're not going to attract a lot of investment. And, you know, quite honestly, I'm not even sure there's an adequate oversight or enforcement mechanism to even ensure that, you know, these opportunity zones will be vibrant. And I highly suspect that with the results of the election, that they'll see much of a future in the new administration about to come to Washington.
Are there any other questions from the audience here? Student, maybe there's a student question. Somebody? Okay, I've got a question for you. I think you have a lot of good ideas for Baltimore and for American cities. And I do think the second of your two initiatives or thematic groupings of strategic suggestions, calling it gentrification might be an unfortunate a term for it. Maybe recapitalization or reinvestment. You've emphasized the economic aspects of it, and gentrification has a more of a social aspect. But I do agree that Baltimore is extremely undercapitalized, and there are many neighborhoods that could benefit from an influx of capital, from new development, from new business opening. No matter who actually starts it, I think there's opportunities there, and I think you made a good case that there's a benefit for the population as a whole. My question is where do you see, in your estimation, where do you see what geographic neighborhoods or areas do you see as being undercapitalized in Baltimore, and what of the strategic tools might you apply to jumpstart development?
Great question. So areas in Baltimore that, well, I think historic Middle East, I can't think of the name of the neighborhoods. It's not Patterson Park, but the neighborhoods north of Patterson Park. So basically the area between Johns Hopkins Hospital and the Great Blacks and Wax Museum, I think, is one area. Sandtown, Winchester was a community that when I was in Baltimore received a lot of focus, still needs some attention. The area of North Avenue, I forget the name of the community, but it's sort of that area that's just west of Reservoir Hill off of North Avenue. Can't think of the name of that community. And then the area by the Mondawmin Mall. I would also say the area by Coppin State University. And then there's still some work to be done in the communities around Morgan State University. Morgan is really a very insular campus. And it's hard to feel its presence beyond the boundary of the university. You walk around the area outside of Morgan, now, with the exception of the Northwood Shopping Center, which the university purchased, and thank goodness for that, because I used to shop there when I was at Morgan, and really did not like the choices I had. But to me, that was a really good attempt to not only expand the campus, but also create more of a physical presence in the neighborhood. So those are areas that I would focus on. And then I would say also there's parts of South Baltimore, Cherry Hill. And there's another community, the name escapes me, that's adjacent to Cherry Hill. I think that also be an area of focus.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If we're, why don't we take one last question? Oh, Cassius, if you could go ahead and ask your question. I see your.
Sure. Thank you. Professor Howard, I was thinking about the District of Columbia has a District Opportunity to Purchase Act, which is some way for the public sector to essentially buy property as it changes hands from private owners. I know that Barcelona has implemented something similar for different neighborhoods. So there's people who are owning property and just sitting on it, waiting for it to appreciate in some way. And so that is dragging down some of their development. And I've long felt if there was some way to force a sale for private owners who are economically rational, but deciding to just sit on properties, that would be useful. I wondered your thoughts on that.
Professor Peelers, we're always great to see you. And yeah, so actually, when my first job out of grad school was working in Baltimore and developing affordable housing in eastern part of the city. And some of the properties that we actually developed were former homestead properties. Baltimore has had a rich history of doing homesteading where, people could come in, get a property through a competitive auction and then rehab it and then, basically get a property for next to nothing. I think they actually called it the Dollar House program. But there were several properties that weren't developed. So obviously there needs to be a stronger enforcement mechanism to ensure that, folks who acquire these properties have the wherewithal and the ability to, get these properties to the completion. And in a similar way, we have vacancy to value today, which is one of the reasons why I suggested that there needs to be, in my humble opinion, a connection between participants in the vacancy to value program, the funding that is available to them. Maybe the city can convince some lenders, some of the wonderful foundations of Baltimore to pull together some resources to have some dedicated funding available to the developers who are awarded these properties. But I also think it would be important to have a requirement that these developers go through some type of development, training, mentoring program. I mentioned Charm City Builders. I mentioned Jumpstart Germantown. Jumpstart Germantown, one of the things that was really effective is that graduates of the program were mentored by more experienced developers. And I had the ability to be a mentor in that program, and it helps startup companies, developers with limited experience, helps them to avoid some of the pitfalls and challenges that make a small project difficult. And so I think, by doing those things, removing those barriers, having dedicated resources available, having a better screening process, a better mentor process, a better education process, hopefully that would ensure, better outcomes.
Maybe we could take one more question. Does somebody have a question? Any more questions? Looking for a hand raised.
Dr. Campo.
Okay, go ahead.
Professor Howard, you were talking about walkable development and walkable communities, and I know there's been a push for a long time to redevelop Penn Station, and it's close to North Avenue, but it seems like it hasn't really moved, and that section isn't necessarily, it's not really pedestrian friendly. How can the city take advantage of that and sort of move along that Penn Station development?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would first like to acknowledge that the area has come a long way. When I was in grad school at Morgan in the 90s, going to Penn Station was, there was a certain element of risk associated with going to Penn Station. Many vacant properties, high crime in that area. So it's come a long way. I would say to, sort of take it to the next level. I think the city needs to encourage the complementary uses that you see in walkable neighborhoods. You know, the small scale entrepreneurs that can, you know, take over a storefront, you know, restaurants, you know, stores that offer amenities and services that the residents want and have access to. I think that will go a long way to help creating the vibrant mixture of uses that are desperately needed to help make that community even more viable.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that question. And thank you, Howard. This has been a great discussion. There is a lot here that that I think we could all learn from, and hopefully some of your ideas will see the light of day in 2021, and will help reverse the decline that you elegantly outlined at the beginning of your presentation. So well, thank you again, and thanks to everyone who showed up. And don't forget that next week we'll have Janet Marie Smith, who works for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and she's going to talk about Camden, the building of Camden Yards, which she was involved in some time ago. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Howard.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye.